Great. We are live. Welcome, everyone, to Portland Cocktail Week Distance Learning. Hi, everybody. My name's Anne Louise. I am the National Portfolio Brand Ambassador for Campari America. We are sponsoring the panel today, so I just wanted to pop on and say hello. Thank you all for joining us. And I'm going to hand this over to Cari Hah to lead the conversation today. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for being on our panel. Thank you, everyone who's joining live. For participating and being part of this conversation as well. Please throw your comments, your questions, and I'm excited to learn with you all. So Cari, I'll hand it off to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anne Louise, and thank you to Campari for sponsoring this panel and this class for us. We are so appreciative of a company actually, recognizing us as a group and, being interested in kind of sponsoring a forum for us to get together and discuss these issues. So we're really grateful for that. And I just wanted to start off. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd really like to emphasize that we are trying to create this forum as a very safe space. Our guests, who are all fabulous bartenders and fabulous friends that you all know, we're all here to be honest and open about our experiences in our life. And I want them to know that, they are being seen and heard and appreciated, and definitely that they are allowed to share their experiences without any sort of criticism or, backlash or anything like that. So please keep that in mind as we all share our lives with you. And again, to the panel, thank you so much for being here and for, in advance, your honesty and your openness. To start off, I would really love to go around and for you to all introduce yourselves. What's your name, where you're from, kind of your ethnic background, and if you feel comfortable, a little bit about, your upbringing and how you came to be in the bar world. So if you don't mind, if you wanna start, Caer.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Caer Maiko Ferguson. I am first-generation Japanese American on my mother's side, and I am Hapa, which basically means that I am half Asian and half not. I grew up in Southern California, which was great. We had a lively Asian American community, but I now live in Austin, Texas, where there are some of us, but definitely not as much. And I was very lucky to start working with an amazing woman named Sharon Young, who is Chinese American. There aren't a lot of Asian American female bartenders, so for us to start working together at the same bar was amazing. And we started a pop-up called Daijobu Pop-Up, where we'd make super Asian cocktails. And that's me.
Thank you so much. How about you, Fanny?
Hello, everyone. My name is Fanny Chu. I am 45 years old. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. And I am a New York City drink stylist and bartender. I was born and raised in California, Southern Cali to be exact. And I moved over to New York about 11 years ago. I started gay dive bartending. And then when I moved to New York, I became a proper bartender, I guess. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Thank you. And moving over to you, Nadine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nadine Madera. I currently live in Honolulu, Hawaii. I lived most of my adult life here, but I was born in New York as a first-generation American. My parents are nurses, and my dad got a job as a nurse in Dallas, which is where I eventually grew up. From there, I moved to Honolulu, and I've been here ever since. And Honolulu is a special, Hawaii in general is a special state just because we're a little bit different in the sense of the AAPI community is our most dominant community out here. So let's talk, expand a little bit more on that.
Interesting perspective.
Yeah,
Get from you a little bit.
definitely.
Later.
Cool.
Right, and last but definitely not least, Christian.
How's it going, everyone? My name is Christian Suzuki Oriana, but I think most people know me as Suzu. That's just the nickname I've had for pretty much my entire life. I am from the Bay Area, from actually born and raised here. However, actually kind of like here, I'm also Hapa. I'm also first generation American. My mother is from Tokyo, and my father is actually from San Salvador. So kind of a crazy little background over there, but long story short, I grew up here, but moved to Japan when I was a young kid, lived there for a few years with my mom and my brother, and we returned back to the States. So I kind of identify both the Bay Area and Tokyo as my hometown. But yeah, I bartend here in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and really got involved in the hospitality industry as a really young kid. Yeah, that's about it. I go by he, him, and his.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Cari Hah. I am a bar professional in Los Angeles. I am second generation Korean American. My folks were born in Korea and immigrated here to the States where they had me, but I have spent a significant amount of time when I was like a baby and young and a toddler in Korea, and always throughout my life back and forth. So I definitely feel like, yes, I am second gen, but I am also super, super Korean. Raised in a super Korean household as well. I bartending is actually my second career. My first was in finance right out of college, and I was working as an investment banker at Goldman Sachs in Chicago and New York. And then decided that is not the life for me, and then somehow fell into bartending and just never left. And I love hospitality, and I'm very excited to be here with you all today. Now, on that tip, I was wondering if are there others of you like me where, being a bar professional is a second career, and what was your first career if so? Fanny?
My first career was I wanted to be a musician, but I didn't end up doing that. But I was working in a laboratory as a technician for, I don't know, 17, 18 years.
Oh, wow.
But I was also like most people of color, we have like multiple jobs to be able to live comfortably. So I always had like 4 or 5 jobs, like either working as a barista or as a lab tech, and then also at a bar too. So I was juggling everything and school.
Oh, all right, Caer, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, I went to school for film and animation. I think like a lot of children of the 90s who were Asian American, things like Sailor Moon were very influential in my early life. And so I remember seeing movies by Miyazaki as a kid and being like, oh, that's what I want to do with my life. So I was a animator and video editor for a few years, but art doesn't pay the bills very often. So I was always bartending throughout that. And then when I moved to Austin, I fully transitioned into more bar, less art, rather than more art, less bar.
That's awesome. I also am a huge fan of animated Hayao Miyazaki films, are my favorite. So
they're amazing. We can talk forever.
All right. Well, what out there? We have a couple topics that we'd like to hit. And, you guys feel free to just kind of like jump in where you feel appropriate and where, I really want this to be a discussion, not just me like 21 questions. So, one of the first topics I'd really like to cover that Christian also you brought up was the idea of cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation, and what that means to you and how you see it and how you'd kind of like to see it.
Oh, are you asking me? Sorry.
No, whoever wants to start.
Yeah, I guess I'll start. I wanted to bring this up because this is like a kind of topic that I see quite often on forums, online, on social media. But it's really like, the conversation on identifying the difference between what cultural and cultural appreciation versus what cultural appropriation is. Now, I'm kind of like the believer that I love everything about everyone's backgrounds and their interests and what their passions are. I never want someone to be stopped from doing what they want to do based off of maybe a culture or identity that they don't or were not born with or something. So I feel as though in the bar industry and the restaurant industry, that's kind of what you see a whole lot of. And I love the fact that a lot of non-AAPI chefs and bartenders are borrowing ingredients or some recipes or some traditions from our cultures and applying it to their cuisine or their menus or whatever it is. I think it's really awesome. However, one thing that I do have an issue with is when there isn't enough research that's being done about those cultures or those traditions or whatnot. And when a lot of people get like very defensive about that kind of stuff too. So I had an example here in San Francisco a few years ago. There was a bar that that started serving like a michelada variation, but they spelt michelada the way that we in Japanese culture write down michelada in Romaji, which is pretty much the kind of like Germanic letters using a Japanese word.
Mhm.
So it was spelled michelada with an R instead of the L. And I kind of called that out. And
Did they have like Japanese ingredients in the michelada? And so that's why they
totally.
went with it? Okay.
And also the bar itself didn't have like any kind of like Japanese theme to it. And I knew one of the chefs who worked there is also Korean, and he had an issue with that as well too. He had come into my bar and kind of told me about it. And I was bartending one day, and like this little mini bottle kind of just popped up like at my bar. And I'm like, what is this doing here? Like, why are they doing this? And the bottling was like, you know, using a lot of hiragana or katakana in this situation, and very kind of like Japanese style looking, the aesthetic and everything. And when I brought this up, they're very defensive about like how they used a company that, or a family that is of Japanese heritage, and that they okayed it. But my issue for that was when you have someone who, like, you know, if you speak to someone who is from Japan, of course, that's how they're going to write it down, and they're not going to find that offensive. But what is offensive is when you're presenting this product to, you know, a big city like San Francisco, where there's tourists coming from all around the world, from the country. Now, saying michelada is offensive to not exactly Japanese people, but Japanese Americans and other Asian Americans as well too, because there's a lot of history that goes behind the L and the R getting mixed up. And if you look at, like, you know, a lot of like the films and music or whatever it is that have been being released in the last 50, 60, 70 years, that's kind of always been like the butt end of a joke. And people, especially right. And I remember growing up, like, you know, even here in the Bay Area, that's supposed to be so open and so like accepting of all cultures. Like, that's definitely a sore spot for me. So when I tried explaining that to the bar director, he kind of shut me down, and it really kind of offended me. Like, I'm explaining to you why this is offensive, like, you know, and this and that. And they didn't take it off the menu, which I thought was kind of shocking. And it didn't take until a bunch of other non-AAPI bartenders to start trending it on social media, like a year later, was when they removed it off the menu. And it was just kind of like a weird situation. And that whole entire situation could have been handled so differently on their part. You know, this guy, he's Caucasian. He could have done his research a little bit better. I'm not at all saying that he's not allowed to use, like, you know, Japanese words or Japanese American words or anything like that, or ingredients. I have a really dear friend who is a white guy who loves Japanese cuisine. He has only trained in Japanese restaurants. So for me to see him, you know, creating these amazing Japanese dishes, opening up a Japanese spot, not kind of like dumbing down the Japanese culture or the ingredients or anything, and really embracing it all together. For me, that was like the perfect way of approaching, you know, appreciating a culture. I like went to his place and I had his curry, and I was like really dumbfounded for a second. His curry was like better than my mom's, and I don't think I'd ever tell her that. So Mom, if you're watching this, like, I'm sorry, but you know, for me, like, that was this aha moment, seeing this this guy take on Japanese cuisine as if it were one of the primary cuisines of the world, where it's like, okay, I want to study and learn this particular culture and this food. Whereas the bartender who I spoke with did not at all approach it that way. So for me, I feel like, you know, if someone says, no, this is inappropriate, you should probably like stop and hold up for a second and really rethink about everything and all your approach, and possibly the people that you could be offended by that. And for me, I really looked at it as like, well, I'm trying to do you a favor, man. Like, you're in like the downtown area of San Francisco, where there are a lot of hotels. Like, your bar is in a hotel. There's going to be a lot of visitors and a lot of really offended people. So Yeah, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought over here.
No, no, not at all. I mean, I think it really is important. One of the things that you kind of said kind of struck a chord with me because there was a bar in, of all places, I think the UK, that did a whole menu, which was a mocking menu of Korean accent and Korean culture. Like every single drink was like a joke name using Korean, Germanized words, and yeah, using ingredients like native to Korea. And it was brought to my attention by another Korean American bartender that lives in Texas, and he was so angry and so pissed off about this, and he put it on his Instagram, like called them out, like what the f, what the f is this, you guys, like just totally mocking my culture and blah 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 blah. And apparently there was like kind of a little bit of a back and forth where a lot of people saw that and started calling them out on it. And so then they like quickly try to backpedal and say, oh no, it was because we really appreciate the culture, and like obviously the first iteration of it was not that. And then finally they just like ended up like canceling the menu. But it was kind of a ridiculous thing that this very well-known famous bar would do that. And it wasn't even trying to be, respectful by using a family that, was of Japanese or Korean heritage to approve the menu names or whatever. They just did it as a huge joke. So, that's definitely like, come on, man, like that's not cool. But it happens. It definitely happens. And even in reputable places where you would think, hey, they probably know better, And I think it's important to really make that distinction between, yes, somebody who's non-AAPI appreciating our culture so much that they study it and make those amazing traditional dishes like your friend, or the one that does the studying and then decides they are hashtag white savior. And I'm here to save this cuisine or this culture's cuisine or, these traditions, because that also happens,
I mean, didn't that just happen like a couple of weeks ago
Yeah.
down in LA too?
Absolutely. And it was a really well-known restaurant, really well-known chef. And, he was just he really upset and offended the Japanese cuisine community by saying, like, I'm the only one who does these right. And I studied this. And all these traditional chefs don't know how to do it. And they're making my job of preserving Japanese heritage so difficult. And we're like, okay, white savior, yeah, we need you to save our heritage, like it's just kind of an interesting little nuance there, that difference in attitude though. And I think same with, bar in the bar. I think it's cool when people use Korean ingredients, but I don't think it's cool if you tell me that you're the one that came up with this first. Like, hello, how many kimchi martinis have I made in my life? Like, you weren't the first one to come up with it. And if I hear gochujang one more time, I'm gonna scream. Learn how to pronounce it right, So, it's cool, but at the same time, I totally agree with you that I wish people would do the research and really like back up, kind of like their love of this culture or things like that. So I don't know if any of you else have anything to add into that.
Or even just people just sitting down and thinking about it with like intention of like, is this going to hurt somebody when I name it a certain way? Like there's no thought behind it sometimes when people are coming up with names. So it's like, you got to sit down and think, oh, is it going to target a certain group if I'm going to do this? Because I'm not of that race. Like just take a minute or two to think about it. If you think it's wrong, chances are it's probably going to be wrong. You probably shouldn't do it.
All right. Well, I think that that's kind of a good place to kind of like move on to the next topic, which, because there's a bunch of things that I really want to kind of go over because I am interested in your guys' lives. In Asian culture, I think there's a lot of fetishism and over exoticism and, eroticism, like sexualization of Asian people, whether it's in the gay community or whether it's in as a woman. And then a sort of desexualization, for hetero Asian males, which is like a weird juxtaposition. But I don't know if any of you have faced any of that, but I would like you to, if you could be honest and brave enough to really speak up about your kind of experiences with that.
I'll go first.
Yes, please.
So I didn't say what kind of Asian I am. I apologize. I'm an American-born Chinese. My parents refer it as ABC, as American-born Chinese. So I'm first generation, and I'm also very queer. I came out when I was 18, kind of a little late, but you know, growing up as a Chinese Gaysian, I never saw like the area that I grew up in was predominantly Latino and Vietnamese, and so there wasn't any like Chinese people like me, and it was like other kind of Asians, and then I just never knew like what it was like to be Chinese until like I actually went to China, and then I saw like my heritage, and I was kind of ashamed like up until I went to China to go visit, and I was just like, I don't know what I am, and still like I'm still trying to figure out who I am and stuff. I guess where I'm going with this is when you're growing up, you don't see Asians on TV or in print or in magazines, and even queer people. So I kind of hid myself a lot growing up, and I just it wasn't until like maybe the last 10 years we have more predominantly like Asian figures in film and on the billboards. So it's like we don't get to see, we try to hide ourselves because we don't see our kind of people in media. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
And I think on the flip side, there's that kind of like people view Asian women as exotic, or, you know, they have these weird fetish stuff.
Yeah.
Definitely a lot of that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like people see me as being gay and stuff, and like liking girls. I get a lot of heterosexual white couples like hitting me up for threesomes. Like, and I'm just like, is there something on my face that says I would be interested in it? Like, you just approach a random stranger and like you use your girlfriend, or you even hit me up. So it's just like, it's really disgusting. It happens a lot in the bar scene. I've had like people follow me in the parking lot when I was living in California, like asking for sexual favors, and I'm just like, what kind of world are we living in? So those are my experiences.
Yeah, I'm kind of similar, where, you know, I get a lot of interest. Like people are like, how come you're single and you're like almost 40? I'm like, well, because the interest that I do get is like really rapey and disgusting. Because like I remember when I was bartending a lot, I would just get customers like come up to me and say all sorts of weird stuff, like stare at me like, are you real? You look like a China doll, baby. Or like some guys would be like, you're so small, I just want to break you. And like, you know, like weird stuff like that I'm like, how is that like interesting to me, or make me like, ooh, baby, like let's talk, you know? Like it's just a little bit scary and a little bit I think misplaced, and I feel very unseen as a person, and it's more just like this little role that they want me to play, this little sub, like, you know, Asian slave or whatever. But I think that you know, is really a discouraging has been a discouraging effect in my life, in terms of like me as a woman, and me being able to have a voice and being a strong woman and feeling able to stand up for myself and stuff. But I mean, Nadine, you're in Hawaii where there's a lot of Asians.
There is a lot of Asians. I wanted to kind of touch on what Fanny said about how we're portrayed on, you know, screens and art, and how we're advertised as a culture. But specifically in Hawaii, obviously there are a lot of beautiful beaches out here, and people come out here to vacation. The idea to come out here is, you know, to go to the beach, to wear bikinis, and, you know, that's how we're, as a state, we're advertised. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that our economy is driven by tourism. And what people don't see often, probably until they get here, or until they do a little bit of digging, is that there is a lot of cultural history and a lot of tradition out here, a lot of rituals that, you know, Polynesian culture and Hawaiian culture, they've, you know, done a lot since they've been out here. They've gone through slavery. They've gone through, like, you know, a lot of them grew up as, a lot of people's ancestors right now were, you know, hardworking plantation workers, and they worked on farms for very little or almost nothing. And that's what a lot of people don't see. So when they come out here, they want to visit Waikiki Beach, and they want to go out with their families, and they meet local people, and the idea that they have in their heads is they're seeing people, women in bikinis, they're seeing men, undressed and out, just laying out and tanning and stuff like that, and that's not everything that it's all about out here. So I think a lot of it has to do with Christian, like you said, people just kind of studying on the cultures and looking things up entirely, not just to go out tanning on the sand, but there's so much opportunity, and Hawaii is very giving in terms of aloha and just showing people around and wanting to share their culture. There's so much to do, and there's so much to see beyond what people are wanting to show out here. So again, that's the draw, right? You work 352 days a year, whatever your career is, and when you want to go on vacation, you want to relax, but you also want to see beautiful things, beautiful sights, beautiful people. And if you dig just a little bit deeper, there's so much more. There's such a story. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Christian, what about you? Like, what has your experience been as, a gay Asian man who is as snazzy looking as you, has the best personality? Like, how has your experiences been as a bartender behind the bar, being over sexualized or, like whatever it may be?
Yeah, so it's one of those things where, like, I think it took until, I don't want to say his name, but like our previous president went into office where I started really kind of like looking back at the differences between what my career was before 2016 and during and then after. But I remember the very first like serious altercation that I had at a bar. I'm not going to say which one it was or where it was. There's 22 different bars you can choose from in San Francisco that I worked at, so it's one of those places. But I had a situation where I stopped a guest from stealing liquor from our bar, and I think their mentality was like, "Oh, this guy is clearly gay. He's Asian, so he's probably going to be very submissive or weak or not very vocal." But when I approached this group, like, I was pissed. Like, they stole a lot of liquor from us during a really busy happy hour. And his response to me confronting him was he grabbed me by the throat and started lifting me off the ground. And this is in a neighborhood where we have a lot of like strip clubs, like, as our neighbors. And I like literally could not breathe for like a solid 15 seconds. And thankfully, I know all the strippers in our area, so they like literally started throwing their shoes at him and like threatening to call the police, and he let me go. But I don't think that would have ever happened if I weren't gay or if I weren't Asian or anything. And I feel like it's so easy to categorize like Asian people in particular, put them in a box as like these very weak, submissive people, especially being a gay Asian man. It's like at times I almost feel like I'm at the bottom of the list or the bottom of the barrel for like people to hire or people to, do this and that. So I don't think I'm a quiet person. I don't think I'm like a weak person at all. So it's always kind of like shocking when I get treated that way. Mm-hmm. And those kind of experiences, they still happen to this day. Like we had an incident at one of my bars just a few weeks ago where I had a guest who literally said to one of our bar backs, like, I don't want my cocktails made by like a gay guy anymore or a gay Asian anymore. Like, I'm over it. I don't want to, I want someone else to make my drinks. We've had situations like where we've gotten to like not physical altercations, but we've had to like defend ourselves for one reason or another because a guest was acting this and that. And it's kind of wild.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that you have to endure that kind of, behavior. And it's kind of a nice segue into another topic that I wanted to discuss, which was, yes, as Asians, we are kind of typecasted to be very like model minority and yes, sir, whatever you want, and like very submissive in that way. But I don't feel like we are like that. You know, maybe we were brought up to kind of not rock the boat, and that's kind of ingrained in us. But more and more, I see more of us speaking out. And, you know, I consider you a very strong voice, Christian, and, you know, Caer, like what you're doing with the Daijobu thing. And Fanny, you're definitely not quite by any means. Like, nobody's shrinking a violet here. So, like, when you do have like a strong personality and you do speak out and, you know, you kind of like you did stand up for yourself, Christian, what is the reaction that you get most of the time? Because I find that the reaction I get when people are like, oh, this little tiny girl is actually like very like opinionated and has a lot to say and is not going to be afraid to say what she wants, they get very shocked. It's a very shocking like revelation for them.
Oh, totally. And I feel, and I can only speak for myself, but like I've definitely gotten like the response of like if I do fight back or if I do talk back or, you know, stand up for myself, then I get recategorized as being emotional or like, you know, overly sensitive. And it's like, no, I'm just trying to, you know, I'm just trying to stand my ground right now, you know, like so it's almost like, you know, you gotta pick what hill you want to die on kind of thing. Like, how do I want to get out of this? Like, you know, I don't know. It can be.
And that's
really
that's the
complicated.
frustrating thing is that you're feeling like you're overextending, you're overcompensating for other people's feelings and the way that they're going to receive you. And that's, you know, that's not going to stop overnight, obviously. But when I was growing up, my parents and I actually didn't have a strong relationship in terms of communication, because my parents grew up and, you know, they were told, just respect your elders, just do what you're told. And that's essentially how they approached raising their children. It wasn't until I moved very far away until we were forced to actually communicate over the phone or during our, you know, very short visits. And I've eventually grown closer with my family, but that is, I think, consistent across the board for a lot of Asian cultures. And a lot of times when we present ourselves, we don't really know how to execute that, especially if we're trying to be sensitive to other people's emotions. So I'm sorry that you get called emotional when in fact the people who are receiving don't know how to receive or accept the people that they're meeting, and they're the ones that are a little bit emotional about it. So
yeah, I have to acknowledge as a Hapa person, I can be white passing in certain spaces, but I've also grown up with a large community of Asian people and friends and coworkers, and now even more so with Daijobu, just like the amount of bartenders we work with. It's been very interesting noticing like how quickly someone is able to receive a more outward comment from me versus someone who is shorter or smaller or more Asian presenting than me. And like it makes me feel almost twice as bad because I'm feeling both my oppression and my privilege at the same time.
Yeah, that's such an interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've never thought about it that way too.
Yeah. I think that came out a lot, especially in this past year with everything that happened with the pandemic. And my business partner is Chinese American and my husband is white. And so when I am out with him versus I am out with her, my experiences are very, very different. Oh, wow. And those are the two people that I've spent most of the past 2 years with. So I always knew it was harder and I had to speak a little louder, but I learned that I think fairly early on. But now trying to advocate even more so for the people who are going to have it even harder than I to do that as well has been like a big point in what activism work I've been trying to do.
Well, honestly, how wonderful and like how grateful I am that there is somebody like you who, instead of taking the road of like, okay, I'm just gonna be white, like I'm gonna totally reject my Asian side because I don't want to deal with like the negative stuff that comes with it. Yeah. And if I can just pass all the time, it's so much, my life is so much easier. But no, you're instead like strong enough to be like, I need to be a voice and I can be louder because I am received a little differently, and like that is such an amazing thing. And I'm so grateful that you're out there doing that and showcasing how wonderful our cultures are. And Fanny, were you gonna say something?
Oh no, I was just tagging on to whatever you guys were saying too.
Well, I mean, I don't know. We were specifically talking about kind of like our experiences during pandemic, and I was gonna ask all of you personally, have you experienced any sort of Asian hate during the past year and a half? And if so, what was that experience? And kind of how you feel about all of that.
Well, my appearance is like I'm kind of a little muscular and not like tiny like most like little Asian women are. And so I was surprised that somebody actually said something like a racial slur to me on the train, and he just muttered it. And I like turned around. I was like, "What'd you say?" He's like, "You fucking gook, go back to your country." And I was just like, but he muttered it. He like said it really soft. I was like, I couldn't hear you. He like walked away. And I was just like,
you actually
this guy wants to,
him.
Yeah, I was like, this guy wants to start a fight. I will fight right now. Like, I'm waiting for it. I've been trained my whole life. I didn't follow him because I'm not a crazy person. But yeah, I was really surprised to hear someone say something to me. And a few weeks later, I also heard another white person drive by and like called me a chink, and I was just like, really? They call me names like this still? Like, it's been, I don't know how long it's been around, but it's like, can't you say something nicer than chink? Come up with a better word. Yeah, so I'm experiencing a little bit more than usual.
How about in San Francisco, Christian?
At the beginning of the pandemic, my roommate and we were very like not leaving the apartment for anything. So I didn't see like anyone for pretty much up until recently. So our exposure to the public was literally just through like going to the grocery store for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then whatever we saw on social media or on TV. Now, I personally have not had like a serious altercation like in real life, but kind of going back to like the gay community, like the amount of racism that I got through like dating apps was insane. Like especially back in like March, April, and May, and I took them all off my phone at one point. I'm like, this is insane. Like every single time I would open it, it's like, this is your guys' fault. Like your people did this to the world, yada 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 yada. And it's like, wow, like. Because I cover a couple different like marginalized groups, I've always just figured we're all in the same boat over here. We're just trying to like, our goal at the end of the day is just earning like, people's love and appreciation and just, achieving equality. So to hear a marginalized group have such hateful things to say against another group was just kind of like, I mean, I've seen it before. I've known it. I've experienced it before too, but just how much it was coming through was kind of insane. And then I think the last 3 or 4 months was when I started actually getting a little scared about my personal safety. I started carrying a mace with me everywhere I go, even if it's just down to the post office. We've had a lot of serious attacks, not only in California, but here in the Bay Area. I mean, just in the last like 2 days, I think there were 5 different attacks on Asian women, specifically elderly women, in the East and South Bay. I think what really scared me the most was we had an elderly Vietnamese man who was murdered less than a quarter of a mile away from me at the local Whole Foods. So my roommate, she's always kind of like, you need to like, be absolutely careful. Like, don't wear your headphones when you're walking anywhere. Just be on high alert at all times. And, it's not just happening to elderly people. Like it's everyone. And it's quite scary. Even here in the Bay Area, I've always looked at this place to be like a safe bubble. And, unfortunately, I feel like the bubble's popped a little bit. So
yeah,
it's wild times right now.
And what about you, Caer? What has your experience been during pandemic?
I definitely didn't receive as much as a lot of my Asian American friends. I closed down pretty quickly, and also, like I said before, depending on what I'm wearing or how my hair is that day, like I'm not so quite obviously Asian sometimes. But I have a number of friends who work in bars in Austin who had someone say, I don't want that person making my drink and things like that. A lot of my work during the pandemic was with our pop-up. We did a 5-week stint. And so everyone who's coming to see us were all people who, you know, support us and love the Asian American community. So I was really lucky that the majority of my public facing time was with very supportive people.
Yeah.
But this was definitely the first time that like I felt very worried every time we took our like bus that says drink super Asian cocktails on the back of it on the road.
Yeah.
And like when we set up every day, I was the person in front like working the counter, and like behind me were like millions of Hello Kitty toys and like snacks and everything that screamed Asian. So there was a lot more like, okay, I know that there are people out there who are hurting people just because they're Asian, and now I am choosing to be extra Asian, which I think was important and part of my act of resistance, but also definitely scary. And then on top of that, I'm currently pregnant. And so like the idea of walking around alone as an Asian woman who is now not necessarily able to fight back in the same way I once could, it was definitely a little bit frightening. But I think the most frightening thing was really just having to have the conversation with my parents and brother about like, you have to be careful. Like, having to tell my mother, who is about to turn 70, like you can't go alone to Sawtell or Little Tokyo. Like, go with my dad, go with my brother, like take care of yourself, because we're not there to do so. And just watching the attacks every single day on social media, like the emotional toll of that is, I think, pretty heavy on all of us.
Yeah. And like, I'm going to finish with you, Nadine, but for me personally, because you just said Little Tokyo, I actually live in Little Tokyo in Los Angeles, like on the border of Little Tokyo and Arts District. And, you know, I thought like, oh, it's fine because, you know, I'm in Little Tokyo. Like, there are fucking Asian people. I mean, excuse my language. There are Asian people here. It's going to be fine. But during pandemic, I was so shocked at how much I was attacked, and I've been spit on, and people have thrown bottles at me out cars. And, you know, I'm at the grocery store and a white woman will be like, get away from me, even though she's the one not wearing the mask. And like, you know, like all this sort of kind of behavior all through pandemic, not even just like one or two things, but like it's gone to the place where now it happens and I'm like, oh, that sucks, whatever. And I just move on. But again, like you, the scary part for me was my worry for my parents. So then half my job now is go shuttle my mom around everywhere so she don't have to go alone, you know, because I don't want her to be attacked. I don't want her to get hurt. I don't want her to get injured, or, you know, anyone to spit on her or yell at her or whatever. So it is kind of an added measure of fear. And it's not fair that, you know, we have to like deal with this and live in fear, you know. It's just like another layer of stress on top of your life, on top of all the stress that you already experienced.
And all the stress of a pandemic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know that Nadine, you were saying that you live in a predominantly AAPI community. So how has it been for you during the pandemic?
It is a little bit different than what you all just described as your personal experiences on the things that you've seen on your side of the Pacific Ocean. But we're essentially in our own little bubble out here, and that's why when I got invited to this to do this opportunity and have this chat with you guys, I jumped at the opportunity, and I felt like it was really important to kind of show face for Hawaii, and also if any of them are tuning in, that to remind them that there are these things happening, and even though they're not happening here, it's really important that we do show some support. And I think very recently there are a lot of people in our service industry that have been creating programs to raise funds for AAPI nonprofit organizations, just to donate from afar, to be active in any way. So there are those things happening or starting to happen, and the ball is kind of rolling there. But it's kind of, you know, out of sight, out of mind, so to speak, for a lot of people out here. And unless, you know, people are watching the news, and even so, even if they are watching the news, a lot of people just, kind of shake their heads and say what a shame within their own households, but there's not much. They feel like they're so out of reach that they just kind of feel helpless in a sense. And the opportunity here is to kind of encourage people to get creative and kind of think outside of the box and check on their families in the mainland or kind of all over the world and make sure everybody's okay. So again, I mean, people from the mainland have been traveling here within the last 8 months. We've seen a very strong showing in our tourism industry. We kind of ramped up pretty quickly. That's another thing. Before coming out here, I would love for people to kind of do some research and kind of consider the culture that is Hawaii and Polynesian and Micronesian, and kind of a melting pot of a lot of Asian cultures. I'd love for people to kind of study up and read up on that stuff, because that will kind of breed a sense of respect, right? So when they come out here, there will be that appreciation, there will be that respect, and there will be, because there are a lot of, I hate to say, but white people that have been visiting very recently that
You don't have to. You don't have to hate to say it. Just say it.
No, there are a lot of white people that have come from the mainland, and
reality is what's going on.
Sure. I mean, let's call it the stimulus check. All of a sudden you run into a little bit of money, and then you get a chance to go on your vacation of your lifetime that you couldn't afford before. And if you are not savvy as a traveler, you don't really know how to act or behave. So we've been getting a lot of run-ins with people who've never been here before, and we appreciate the business, and it's keeping us on our feet. There's still a lot of issues in the way that they're treating the people who are local and the people who are serving them and whatnot. For example, people not tipping, not abiding by the
everywhere, not just where you are.
Right, not abiding by the state mandates in terms of the pandemic. We still have a mask mandate, but I had a guest come to our host stand to dine in our restaurant, and I asked her if she could put her mask on, and she said, "Oh, don't worry about it. I'm vaccinated." And I was like, "Well, some of my staff haven't been vaccinated, so I really appreciate it. It's mandated." So a lot of people are a little bit ignorant when they've come to travel, and it's just that reminder to everyone to kind of be mindful and be respectful. So.
Well, thank you all for sharing your experiences during the pandemic. But actually, what you were saying, Nadine, is a perfect segue into a question that we've received. And the question is that we have all heard a lot of chatter about the new normal and, like the hashtag pivot, which I hate that word. But, it is true. And what would you like to see more or less of in the bartending community to treat Asian flavors and cultures respectfully? Thanks, Jared, for asking that question. That's a really good question. So just give that a little thought, and if anybody wants to chime in and give their answer to it.
Yeah, I mean, I've got one little thought. I think for me, at least, I can only speak for myself, but it's not really so much I guess the term borrowing flavors or, ingredients from cultures. I think we would live in a very boring world if we all just stayed in our lane. I think borrowing from other cultures is super amazing. I only speak from my personal background and experience. If you look at Japanese cuisine, a lot of really iconic Japanese dishes are not traditionally from Japan. If you look at curry, that is adapted from India. If you look at ramen, that's adapted from China. So, I love the fact that people are so interested in other cuisines and other cultures that they weren't born with. So for me, it's not so much the actual flavors or the ingredients. It's more of what sometimes comes after that. I remember going to a bar, I don't remember what city it was, but the cocktail had I think a Japanese, I don't remember what spirit it was, and a bunch of other Asian ingredients, and it was called Love Me Long Time. So little things like that where
that name, yeah,
right. So lots of really, really inappropriate cultural references that I think it doesn't really just start within the bar industry, it really kind of starts as like a giant community as Americans to begin with. You know, there's a lot of unpacking to do when it, you know, looking back on pop culture, the media, everything that has been kind of been already shown and released, and how we've been categorized and how we've been put in like this little box. And from there, we can kind of start nitpicking how to better, you know, represent a culture that we're not really identified with from whatever industry or whatever world you're in after that.
Also, I think it's a little ridiculous that just because you use one ingredient like yuzu, all of a sudden your cocktail's Japanese.
Right.
Sorry, that's not true. Like,
I mean, like, I love using, like, you know, like Thai basil and like macroot lime leaves in a lot of my cocktails, but I wouldn't necessarily say that they're like, or even like pandan, and I wouldn't even say that like my cocktail's now like, you know, a Filipino cocktail or something, or like, you know, it's not like a Thai cocktail, but for me, it's like those flavors I think are just really awesome, and they are better amplified paired with something else that might not be Asian at all. It might be like mezcal or something. So
yeah, absolutely. Like, let's just move past that whole idea. Like, oh, this is a Japanese cocktail because I use yuzu in it. No.
Yeah, that I feel like has been such a thing where people love to use one Asian ingredient and all of a sudden it's this X factor, and like, wow, my drink is different now. And it's so reminiscent of the exoticism that exists of Asian culture that it's like, I'm being exoticized as a person, my ingredients are being exoticized and used in that way. Like, it's just exhausting. But yeah, I think exactly what Suzu was talking about, like, this is weird coming from someone who spends a lot of their time making drinks with all Asian ingredients, but you don't have to put Asian ingredients with Asian spirits. Like, we all as bartenders know how to taste. And when you taste soju, it's not like you're only tasting Asian flavors. Like, there are so many other ways to go. Branch out of that one circle of Asian cultural things.
Yeah, and again, even going back to that, like, it doesn't have to have sake in it for it to be a Japanese cocktail. Like, this idea that we belong in this little box, and even in our cocktails we are like kind of crushed in there and like stuffed into there, is something that I think is a huge issue. I think it would be great if people really just like expanded their minds and understood that, yeah, you could be inspired by these flavors from a country, but that doesn't make your cocktail that country's cocktail, like, and I'm totally with you, Caer, on, yeah, I like using bourbon and infusing it with like Asian ingredients. Like, it's awesome together, like you can use Scotch whiskey and Korean ingredients, or, making cocktails is not about like just making a country's cocktail. But I find that only people do that with like Asian stuff and Latin cocktails.
Yeah.
And then
oh yeah,
100%.
It's those two cultures that people put the Asian ingredient with the Asian spirit and then call it whatever that country's cocktail is, and same with Latin,
Because we only matter.
Yeah.
That's it. It's just us.
So, really, if you want to be inspired by a flavor, absolutely, like, go at it. Like, I'm inspired by all flavors of all countries, but I'm never going to appropriate that culture and say into my cocktail and say, this is that culture. Because even as an Asian, I don't know not that much about Filipino ingredients or Filipino drinks or Filipino food. And lately in LA, Filipino culture and food has become a really like hot, trendy kind of cuisine. And even there was a bar open called Geneva that I hope I was able to reference it. I'm sorry. I know maybe I have to reference 2 more bars after that. But this bar opened as a Filipino-owned, woman-owned bar. And they were really concentrated on doing all these sort of like Filipino flavor inspired drinks. But their first bar manager was a Caucasian person. So no hate to them or anything, because that's amazing, I think, what they did. But then every drink kind of was just like, okay, because there's coconut or pandan or something like that, like infused with this, then all of a sudden it's a Filipino drink. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but
I think that the story and the inspiration tied into whatever the creation is, whether it's a dish or a cocktail, with whatever ingredients you use to create, obviously, that blend of flavor, if there's an inspired story that is tied into that, that's a little bit more acceptable. It's a lot more acceptable in terms of, you know, I mean, whatever ingredient you want to use. And if you took a trip or did a stint in the Philippines, or you've gone to Asia and you've spent some time there, you met this person and they told you a story and it really pulled at your heartstrings and inspired you to create something so awesome and you're proud of it. We love that. Like, we love to share the culture and we love to see products come from those experiences. But yeah, I think that's you know, I think people need to be more mindful again, you know?
It was a missed opportunity in my mind, because they could have hired somebody as amazing as you, who really knows the culture, who really is part of it and has grown up with it and has a deep love of it and appreciation and understanding.
Oh, if they hired me, then there would be fish sauce and everything. So
Yes!
I thought it'd be fun to rim cocktails with MSG, you know, like an MSG rim.
Yes.
But all right, well, you know, there is a couple other things that I really want to kind of like cover, and we're running out of time, but it is May, and not only is May Asian Heritage Month, but it's also Mental Health Awareness Month. And, you know, we just have a little bit of time to touch on this, but I think mental health within the Asian community is a very stigmatized topic, a stigmatized illness. We are, you know, brought up to appear perfect on the surface and nothing else matters, right? Except for how other people can perceive us. So to have mental illness would be considered a shameful weakness, to admit it even worse so. But we are actually brought up under such traumatic situations where either, you know, it's emotional, physical abuse, you know, by, you know, our own families, or, you know, the racism that we see from the outside, or the microaggressions that we kind of experience every day as Asians, that really, I think, do affect our mental health in a way that, you know, really does have an impact and shapes the way that we grow up and shapes the way that we are humans, and even into our adult lives. So I kind of wanted to touch on what your all opinion of, you know, the mental health situation in the Asian community is, and maybe if you're brave enough or you want to talk about your own personal journeys with that, I would really appreciate to hear it. And feel free, anybody could start.
I think it's really good that we're having conversations like this, honestly, and like telling our stories, because I don't know, everyone has different situations, but I'm sure a lot of us haven't necessarily talked about the amount of trauma that we've gone through in the past year. And I'm really hoping that the Asian American people who are watching this right now feel like they have someone else they can talk to about it. I feel really lucky that I have a business partner I talk to almost every day who's Asian American. And like, if something really awful has happened that day, I have someone I can immediately go to who I know is going to get it and is going to have at least a close enough experience to me that I feel that support. But for those of us who don't have therapy or don't have a community, at least we have moments like this, but we need more of those.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I think like, and I can only speak from like my experience, but I'm also going to borrow from like, you know, some of the things that I've heard from like my other AAPI friends, but I feel as though like a lot of, especially like first generation American or Asian Americans, AAPI Americans, kind of are brought up in this like mentality that you should be ashamed of yourself if you have to talk about something like mental illness or like, you know, your emotions, like you're a weak person if you do. And that's kind of coming from like, you know, a background of people or like, you know, our grandparents' generations and our generations before that have gone through like a lot of things like war and all these things where that kind of strength, I guess they would call it, is supposed to be passed down from generation to generation. But at the end of the day, like, you know, that's such an old school way of thinking. Like, we're in 2021, like we can't just always assume that, you know, this and that person is a weak person because they had emotions of.
I think he froze up.
Oh no.
Yeah, I think we lost a Suzu.
Susie! All right, well, you know,
Susan, come back.
Fanny, you want to kind of add something on? We have like 1 minute left before we have to close this like amazing conversation. I wish we could talk forever about it.
Yeah, sure. I know that growing up, like my parents were so, they loved us so much that they felt like they had to overprotect us. So I didn't get a chance to like go to sleepovers and do certain things like most American kids did. I grew up playing piano 8 hours a day, playing violin, and like doing my homework in the back of the restaurant where I was growing up. My parents had a restaurant. So, and we were taught to keep our head down, do our work, and don't complain. And that's something that we need to break as first generation Americans or Asian Americans. Just being able to use your voice to be able to like talk about how you feel. It is not a weakness. It's okay to cry. I grew up, if I cried, I got smacked in the face. And it's just like, I'm not allowed to like show any kind of emotion. And like, I'm 45 now and I'm starting to go to therapy and realizing how codependency like really affects everybody. My relationships, I see it with my family. My mom and dad are codependent on each other. And I realize most of my relationships I see is from my parents. And it's like, I'm trying to undo generations of guilt that I shouldn't be feeling. And I don't know why I'm feeling this way, but it's probably passed down from generations before them. Yeah. And my mom is still like in grievance of her mother who passed away like 40 something years ago. And it's just like, she doesn't know how to come to terms with her mental, like she doesn't feel like she has a mental illness because she doesn't talk about it. Sure. It's like acknowledging it. So,
well, I think, you know, acknowledgement is so important. And the fact that all of you are able to be brave and speak out and really have voices in all of this, it gives me so much inspiration and encouragement to keep going on my own journey as well, for all the suffering and all the mental illness that I deal with and all the, you know, abuse and hatred and all of these things. It's really, really comforting to know that there are a group of people such as yourselves and more so that are out there. And, you know, I just wanted to extend, you know, that anybody out there who feels like they need to reach out to somebody could reach out to me. Any of the people here, we're all here for you and to support each other and really continue to have a voice, because we never really did before. And it's time now, you know. And I'm so thankful to, you know, Portland Cocktail Week and Campari for believing in us as a group and for seeing us as a group and giving us this opportunity to really have this forum and come out as honestly as we can. And yes, thank you to all of you. And thank you to everyone who joined us. I'm so sorry that we had to cut this a little short. I still had all these topics I wanted to cover that we didn't get to. So maybe we'll have to do a part 2. But, you know, I hope all of you enjoyed sharing your lives with everybody. And if you enjoyed this class, please hit the like or love button and show some love in the comments. And if you want to see more of those Portland Cocktail Week classes like this one, follow Portland Cocktail Week on Facebook or YouTube. And all the classes are archived in both places. And we are also at PDXCW on Instagram. So you can find out all the happenings up there. So, and finally, don't forget to follow at Campari Community for like all the latest Campari news and events, and sign up for that community newsletter because they send out awesome swag all the time and little gifts and just really good resources for all bartenders. And we're just really grateful to Campari for continuing to invest in bartenders and believing that we are worth investing in. So all of you, thank you, thank you, thank you. To our audience, we really appreciate you joining in and your comments and your commentary and the love that you sent us. And we hope that this was useful or at least interesting, and that we'll have a chance to do it again very soon.